these, these measures, of killing spree. And of course the king goes to him and says, what are you doing? Only the Brahmins are allowed to do austerities like that, He says, well, I'm trying to get near God, I'm trying to get knowledge. And the king says that you have no right to knowledge, you have no right to read or write or to hear. And the penalty for that, of course, is death. So look at these justification, these are again theological and philosophical justification. Those whose conduct has been good will quickly attain some good birth, the birth of the Brahmin or Kshatriya or Vaishya, but those whose conduct has been evil will quickly attain an evil birth. So it becomes a kind of a self-justification, self-serving. And here we get the concept of karma, which is quite famous in the West. And we tend to imagine karma as you shall reap what you sow. You do evil deeds here, and you sooner or later you get the benefit of it. So things come around, But in this instance, you are actually born in the next life. So it's a very clever argument, because nobody's come back to tell us what the next life is like. So it's a very, very difficult argument to break. And there is the circle, the arguments go. Around about 600 BC, you got these 16 major Aryans and non-Aryan tribes. And you got these rising kings. And Chanakya comes on the scene and he says, you can actually subjugate all these tribes, and he gives the techniques. And he says that there has been 10 previous teachers to him. So this process has been going on for a very long time. Okay, so divide and rule, bribe the weaker clans against the stronger ones, send agent provocateurs, poison wells, assassination, liquor, prostitutes, the whole lot. And settle the country population as Shudras in the villages under the caste system. And absorb the tribal elite warriors as Kshatriyas. So you make a deal with the Kshatriyas, or the warriors, and you say, okay, we'll give you a place in our hierarchy, but for the rest, they have to be menials. One of the great wars, the earliest war fought in India was against this confederacy called Kalinga, which is a tribal confederacy. Ashoka the Great, he has his eyes on the eastern seaboard in India. So all the various tribes got together to create a confederacy to oppose him. Well, of course, this is taken from one of his stone inscriptions. In the 8th year of his consecration, the beloved of the gods, King Priyadasi, conquered Kalinga. 150,000 men were thence carried away captive, 100,000 were there slain, and many times that number died. So that was a very big war. And it is said that after this, Ashoka became a Buddhist, because he started to abhor violence. But I don't think it's quite right. I think when he realized that it takes too much effort to subdue these tribes, so he adopted a new policy of diplomatic measures, bribing, but he never disbanded his army. You would have thought that if he had become a Buddhist, the first thing he would do is to disband his army, but that wouldn't do, because how else are you going to stay in power? Okay, so the earliest opponents of the caste system were the Lokaitics, these are the rationalists or the humanists, Buddhists, Jains. They opposed the power caste Vedic sacrifice, in which hand-in-hand violence and war. So this Lokaita, the humanistic philosophy, is a materialist doctrine of ancient India, and Lokaita means that which is amongst the people. That's the kind of people's wisdom. Okay, around about the time of Christ, we are getting a crisis in the system. As Buddhism comes on the scene, the merchants, traders, the craftspeople are actually getting better under Buddhism. Now the kings had to balance the two, Hinduism versus Buddhism, because their rule depended on it. But one of the side effects was that Buddhism took off. For 1,000 years it was on equal footing, if not on better footing, than Hinduism. So come the time of Christ, there's a crisis in the system. There's violence. The menials are now starting to behave, above their station. So they are subdued, but we have another holy book which comes in, which is called Manu Smriti, right? The law of Manu. And it quotes the Rig Veda, the old one, which says when the primeval man was sacrificed, the gods cut him up into 4 parts. So now we have it says that slavery is inherent in Shudra, who can change it? You know? And women and Shudra are now equated, they're bracketed together. Intermarriage between castes are forbidden. Now there are hundreds of castes in reality due to the diversity of ethnic tribal clans. Now how do you reconcile this Varna, which is a 4-4 system, and thousands of castes? He creates a fictive illogical theory of mixing of Varnas, and the scholars don't accept that. They say it's just a pure justification for exploitation and nothing else. So he's now starting to give differential rewards and punishment for different Varnas. So if you're a Brahmin and you kill a Shudra, well, you know, £100, right? Is the fine. But if a Brahmin should even insult a Shudra, let's say he insult him with his tongue, then his tongue should be cut off. So there is this differential between rewards, awards, and punishment. And it's written into the Holy Book, it's hardwired, so to speak. And women's position is now formally degraded. Non-Aryan women actually had more equality. And this is also picked up in the scriptures. The women were not quite equal, but they were very much equal to the men in the indigenous society. And every succeeding Hindu lawgiver quoted Manu approvingly. And they always said at the end, Iti Manu, which said, thus said Manu. So if they wanted to justify something, that's all they had to do, was right at the end, Iti Manu. Okay, here are the differential punishments and what have you. If he mentioned the name and caste of the twice born, which are the top 3 Varnas, with contempt, an iron nail 10 fingers long shall be thrust red hot into his mouth, and so on. It goes on like that. You know, it's a horrible reading, and they do it these days. Not this kind of thing, but the typical kind of thing might be you can't wear shoes when you go through the high class locality. They'll beat you up. You can't have your mustache upward. It must be downward, or no mustache at all. You cannot ride a horse on a wedding party. A horse denotes royal power, if you like. The groom for that day is actually treated like a king. You cannot have that, you know. You cannot wear fine clothes, jewelry. There are schools now, schools in India where untouchable children are given just roti, that's the flat bread, and salt. That's all they're getting. As just 18 hours old, there was a news, a teacher teaching in a school, his water pot is separate from the other teachers because he's untouchable. The list goes on and on and on, you know. It's just a slightly watered down version of the ancient laws, but they are practiced on a daily basis. Okay. One of the tribe called Chandal becomes synonymous, you know, with untouchables. You know, there's a history behind it. And Manu said their habitat can't live in the village. It has to be, you know, away from the village. Clothing taken from leftover from dead body, broken dishes. Ornaments only black iron. Wealth, dogs and donkeys. And it says in one of the Buddhist religious stories, a maiden washed her eyes upon seeing a Chandal. That is actually in one of the Chinese translations in Beijing, you know, translated from Indian. The original is lost, but we know that because one of the Buddhist monks who came from China to India, he recorded this story, so we know about that. Outside the village, and the word shall be, okay. This is one of the tribal women you can see from her finery. By 500, the Manu's ideal society, you know, the concept of that has been applied to all over India, and this coincides with the mass migration of Roma, the Gypsy people from India, because they were too freedom-loving. They didn't submit. They said, we'd rather go somewhere else, we don't want to stay here. Yeah? And this is proved actually by A, by genetics, and B, by linguistic analysis of the Romani language.
So they were a particular group, were they, in India?
There were many different disparate tribes and sub-tribes.
But all called Roma.
Yeah. Some accepted the you know, Manu scripture because it was too difficult to fight against it. So one of the things they did, they made the cow holy. Yeah? So if you were forced to live on things like carrion, and then they said, oh, well, you know, you are untouchable because you're eating what is considered to be a holy animal. Again, you know, kind of circular argument. A lot of the people accepted their fate because they tried struggling around about the time of Christ, but they met with failure. and then the system became very rigid after that. So endogamy was legalized, enforced endogamy, and also differential punishments in the world and so on. So it became very, very difficult for people at the bottom to rebel against it, and some of them just simply migrated to the West. Okay, here's one of the, it's actually early sort of 20th century painting of a tribal uprising. And of course this is how you degrade people, people who are, if you go back, if you look at this lady here, you might think she's from any typical Indian village, she's a tribal woman. So these are the people who are actually then reduced to this. That's the sort of process. If you don't submit, sooner or later the machinery will grind you down. Yeah? It just takes time. But the thing is, the Adivasi tribals have also fought back. Here's some of the tribals from Orissa, eastern state. Kalinga I mentioned earlier on. There was a company called Vedanta, which is based in London, originally from India. And I think in some of the African states, they went out there exploiting copper and polluted the countryside, and they exploited the people. And they were doing the same in India. Yeah. So they fought back, and some of them took up to arms. They've always fought back, with arms. Although went down their weapons were not that good. And this is the result, of course. That's why people submit, because when there is warfare going on, the Indian army and the Indian paramilitary forces don't care, who gets in the middle or who they kill. Around about 500 AD is basically destroyed, from India, right, by many means. Yeah, physical destruction, vegetarianism, cow protection, and incorporation of non-elite religious practices, plus the new god in town called Shiva, right? In opposition, they bring into opposition to Buddha. Now, Buddhism disappeared from the land of his birth. It flourished in China, in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Burma, all sorts of places. But there was a time when there was the very name of Buddha disappears from India. And it's only in the 19th century when the colonial British and others go and they look at some of the manuscripts in China that they realize that there was such a thing as Buddhism in India. That's absolutely amazing. Okay, they started a new religion called Tantra, which is not the same Hinduism of the old, but it's a new one. And what they try to do is, by having this religion, they are taking over some of the humanistic philosophy, steal their clothes, and to turn the Adivasi areas into plough-based caste society peacefully by tax-free grants to the temple-based Brahmins. So Tantra in the West has got this connotation about sensuous sex. Nothing of that sort. So it's supposed to be providing empowerment for peace. Actually, if you read Kalchakra Tantra, it's about war. It was killing the other side. But you wouldn't think so by looking at the number of books that are openly on sale in all parts of the United Kingdom, United States and elsewhere. I don't think anybody's read Kalchakra Tantra. Everybody reads what the Dalai Lama has to say about it. And so they just assume that he must be talking the truth. In fact, he doesn't. So we have these fantastic temples, land grant collectively given to Brahmins, and temples and monasteries receive right as alternative to caste salaries. So revenue rights as an alternative to caste salaries, granting of judicial and administration rights, water wheels, step wells, etc. The granting of judicial and administration rights is important because what it basically did was, the king is the ruler, is the apex ruler, but at a local level, the king, backed up by Manu Simriti and the holy scriptures, is the magistrate. So he can pronounce judgments in accordance with caste laws. So what you've done is you diffuse the power at a local level. At one time, you see, if you're the king, if there's rebellion, you have to raise an army and fight them. And armies cost money, they're very expensive, and you might be defeated. But this way, what you do is, you just diffuse the violence at local level. And that's what's happening in India even now. The violence is diffused at a local level. So you cannot even begin to struggle at a village level because there will be somebody there to beat you up or to kill you or whatever. And you cannot even go to the police station complaining. There's an interesting case recently. A woman got raped and her husband went to the police station to make a report. So they killed him by beating. So, you know, people don't even go to the police because what's the use of going to the police? Because they are going to be from upper caste. So Hindu temples with attached tax-free land granted to the Brahmin, they become very rich. And the center of political power, economy, elite culture and rituals, including one of the unique institutions in the world, that's the sacred temple prostitution. And we still have something like 97,000 sacred prostitutes in the Indian temples, even now. Yeah? Okay, there are some of them. And actually some of the dancing techniques came from them. So this is a Jogini, she's got matted hair, right? And this is one of the upper caste women, you know, doing the same dance. But this is considered, you know, classical, good, and this is obviously obscene. And it's some of the books written on the subject. Okay. Around about 700-800, you know, this philosopher, the great Shankaracharya, he reinterprets the Vedantic philosophy using Buddhist dialectics to defeat Buddhism. And he said, we are all one Brahma, you know, everything is Maya, illusion, you know, this world is Maya. Don't believe in it, you want to escape from it, right? This is a fantastic argument. What it basically says is, stop struggling against it because it's an illusion. What can you do about it? You can't do anything. And he has great influence, you know, in Hinduism. Okay. But there's a reaction to this kind of philosophy. And some people are coming up. For example, this particular saint, he's anti-caste, and he is, if you like, he didn't invent yoga, which goes back to the Indus Valley, but he kind of codified it, and he said, it's the human body that's important. The human body is important. If anybody says the human body isn't important, they are not telling you the whole truth. It's the mind and body together, you know, that work together. If you torture your body, it's no good. And if you have wrong ideas, that's no good. So this is a manuscript from the Welcome Foundation near Euston Square, you know, all the yoga postures. And it carries on. Under the Chola kingdoms in South India, we have these yogis who are anti-caste and they're herbalists, and they actually believe in the equality of women. And funny enough, they believe in a formless God. And the reason for that is too dangerous to say there's no God. So they say, yes, we believe in God too, but this God has no form, it has no property, it doesn't come to this earth, it doesn't defend the caste system. It is neither he or she. Yeah? So we can't say women are inferior. So it's that kind of philosophy, right, which is, you know, good. Of course, then Islam arrives somewhere after that. There's a Taj Mahal people praying, and there's the principles of Islamic jurisprudence. And of course, Islam came, the school of Hanafi school of jurisprudence comes from adjacent countries adjacent to India, you know, these dark green areas. And of course, they soon pick up this idea, right? You know, some people say Islam brought equality to India, but it didn't. Why should it? They were conquerors after all. It was their job to, you know, rule. So, the ideal Hanafi school, according to the ideal Hanafi school of jurisprudence, the ideal society was men of the pen, Brahmins, men of the arms, Kshatriyas, men of trade and agriculture, and manual workers, which is exactly the same as the Hindu thing. So what you've done, you actually made it part of Islam, which wasn't there before. The interesting thing is there was never a united front to expel Islam from India. Instead, Hindus and Muslim elites joined forces to keep everybody else down. Okay, there is reaction. And here is a famous man called Kabir. He's sometimes described as a sort of Muhammad Ali of Indian theology. he used some really strong language uh, to attack the caste system. He says, Brahmin, where does untouchability come from? Tell me as you believe in it. And this is the famous first guru of the Sikhs, Guru Nanak. And he says he's on the side of the lowest of the low caste and doth not envy the company of those highly placed. So this is a reaction to the caste system in around about 1400. And here is a famous saint who is contemporary with Sir Thomas More, the author of Utopia, except that he comes up with the concept of Utopia before Sir Thomas More. So he's very famous. And he described a city called Begumpura, which is without any sorrow. Recently, there was a temple that was dedicated to him in New Delhi, and the temple was in a very rich area. It used to be in the wilderness at one time. Delhi's expanded. So this temple ground now is worth about 250 million pounds. So the upper caste took a writ from the High Court saying that this area should be developed. So they demolished the temple overnight. And first time in history, the untouchable people have risen up and they marched on Delhi and they demolished the wall that the contractor had built. And this is something unheard of because nobody had marched on Delhi before. People have tried and gone there for demonstrations and sit down and what have you. And the funny thing is, this man's influence is so much that people from other than the untouchable caste are now coming around to join the movement that is started for the restoration of the temple. So, the god, according to this man, was actually without any properties. And if God was an ornament, then man was kind of a nugget of gold. What he said was that God was only a polished version of man. So in kind of Shakespearean term, you know, a man could be like an angel if he did good deeds. It's that kind of philosophy. And it still resonates after 600 odd years, you know, with common people in India. And actually his hymns are contained in the Holy Book of the Sikhs. And there have been many attempts to take those hymns out of the holy books of the Sikhs, and the Sikhs have fought back saying, we will not take his hymns out. And people point out, well, he was very poor, he was untouchable, you are very, you know, high, you got power. And they say, no, if we lose him, we lose our identity. You know. Okay, so later his followers turned to military arms, and in 1672, they nearly toppled the Emperor Aurangzeb. So they nearly walked into Delhi. And his followers, in the 21st century, in 2019, have actually done that in a sense, by going there and demolishing this wall built by the contractor. And this is one of the contemporary sources, the Mughal one, that's the enemies describing, led by a toothless old witch, a Joan of Arc figure. They repeated scenes from the Mahabharata by slaughtering the greatest number of elephants ever witnessed. So the Mahabharata is the classic text, which is a mythical document which describes the two kingdoms fighting each other. And these so-called untouchables actually killed the greatest number of elephants ever recorded with very primitive weapons. So, but these things are buried here in, you know, Victoria and Albert Museum or in the British Library or somewhere else. You have to sort of dig them out. This is Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru of the Sikhs. So the devotion to the formless God now also includes devotion to steel weapons. This is what we fight back. And this man came after Guru Gobind Singh, and he actually, first time in India's history, he turned the caste system upside down in the Punjab. But he's betrayed by the higher caste Sikhs, and he's tortured and killed in this painting here. And so the city without sorrow of Ravidas, he created that actually in Punjab countryside. So it didn't matter who you were. If you went up to him, it didn't matter about your background, by your birth. If you had what you call merit, he would take you into his army and his administration, and he would promote you. He will promote you over any noble man who might be serving under him. So he kind of created a very equal society. And then the British come to India. So they find that the ancient law of Manu, it's a pretty good thing, because it believes in splitting up the society, and their philosophy was divide and rule. So they did pretty well by saying, we don't want to interfere in the native affairs. So the British displaced the Muslims from the apex, no interference in the local customs, effectively divide and rule. But there are some unintended consequences to that. The missionaries come in, and some people from the lower caste are also attending the missionary schools, and they started to read, Thomas Paine's, work and so on. They are then writing polemics. And there are some women who become Christians. She's the first Indian feminist, had an intercaste marriage, worked against child marriage, supported child widows and the untouchable. And Pandita, that's the title she was given, actually means learned. It means a priest, a learned priest. But she earned that title by her sheer persistence, her learning and her action. And this man wrote many polemics, against the Brahmins. Okay, this is one of the original rationalists in India, Periyar. And he said the caste system that teaches notions of superiority, inferiority, high and low, depending on the birth, should be scorched at the very base. He still exercised a great deal of influence, especially in South India and amongst the so-called low caste everywhere. And here's a revolutionary, an anarchist, who went around throwing bombs at the British. And one of the things, he actually came from upper caste, but he said, he's addressing the untouchable. He said, why do you he's addressing those people who want to become the leaders of the untouchables, They want to use them for their own political end. And he said, why do you wish to become the leaders of the untouchables? Why don't you repent of 3,000 years of atrocities? Why don't you tell the untouchables, we will follow you, not you follow us? Untouchable lions, rise up, break your chains. So he's very much ahead of his times. He's 23 years old when he's hanged by the British. But by that time, he's read numerous books, had taken part in a lot of polemics and so on. And what he said was basically 50, 60 years ahead of his time. He was just totally and utterly fearless. And that's shown in his picture here. After killing one of the British officers, there is a curfew in the whole of the city. So nobody can go in and out. So basically he cuts his hair, which was long, and he wore a turban originally. He shaves off his beard, puts on a bush hat, and with some of his friends, one of the friends acting as his servant, they just walk out of the city into the railway station and off they go. He had that kind of bravery, if you like. And then came Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. His motto is educate, organize and agitate. Lots of degrees after his name, courtesy of a philanthropic Maharaja. He comes to LSE, Columbia University, Doctor of Philosophy, etc., etc. Alistair, first Law Minister of India. Did rather well. But when he's young, he's subject to all kinds of stimulation measures. The agreement with the Maharaja was that the Maharaja would sponsor him to go overseas for his education, and he would serve the Maharaja for 5 years in his state. But there's only problem. He can't find a place to live. Nobody will give him a room in that city. When he goes to his office, his servants, so-called, they won't even bring the files to him and give it to him. They will just bring the file and they'll put it on the table somewhere here. They won't touch anything that he's touching directly, in case they get polluted. So, he can't have a place to live. They actually hound him out when he passes himself off as a non-untouchable. And he goes underneath a tree and he cries, and he spends the night there. And the next day, Maharaja says, okay, I relieve you of your obligation to me. You can go and do whatever you like. This is the Maharaja, Ambedkar, who sponsored Ambedkar, such strings of degrees, and as I said, he was a prolific writer, great debater and organizer, and his writings are becoming extremely important as time is going. And he opposed Gandhi. Gandhi opposed him at every step. He drafted the Constitution of Independent India, and remains the most popular icon of Dalit resistance. Now in the 1995, when the, I think 80s and 90s, when internet started, there were about 20 entries dedicated to him. Now there are about 5 million. So that's how far he has come. Here's one of his saying in 1956 when he drafted the Indian Constitution. Note, he didn't dress up like Gandhi. Gandhi was also a barrister and he used to wear silk clothes in South Africa, and he used to describe the native Zulus as Kafirs, it's a Dutch term, a derogatory term. And Gandhi would, when he came to India, would put on a loincloth, appear as a holy man, as a very poor man. Ambedkar, on the other hand, used to wear silk suits, expensive ties. He was a barrister, yeah? And he said, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions in politics. We will have equality on paper, that is, and in social and economic life we will have inequality. We must remove this contradiction, or else who suffer from this inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy. And that is what is happening in India now. So that's 56, half a century forward. On paper, India remains the largest democracy in the world. But then, like in America, election machines go wrong. Yeah? There is a term called booth capturing, where you go to the polling station with guns and you simply take it over. And if anybody wants to, come and vote there, well, they better watch out. Some of the atrocities here, some people who were thought to be skinning a cow on the roadside, so they were massively beaten, and the whole thing went on the internet. Yeah. There was a scholar, he was doing a PhD in astrophysics, and he was basically hounded, to death. The suicide rate amongst the untouchable students in the college and the university is something like 5-6 times higher than normal students, because they get bullied, about their caste. Here is one of the demonstrations. Is another one. Okay, demonstration in London, anti-caste groups, they regularly do demonstrations. Some of the atrocities figures, what's, rapes, burning, killing, and actually these are the tip of the iceberg, because who's going to go to the police station and make a report? And nobody's going to do anything about it. Here's a man whose daughter was raped, and he took the case to courts and he wouldn't give up, and they tried to bribe him. He didn't give up, and they threatened him, and they said, we'll cut your arms and legs off. And he didn't, relent. He didn't go back. So they did exactly that. But even though he's in this state and in the wheelchair, he still sings radical songs. He says, I've still got my tongue, I can fight back with my tongue. That's the kind of attitude. Militia, upper caste militia in Bihar, dead people, more dead people. So, Constitution of India, in theory, equality on paper, even positive discriminatory measures. In practice, we see in the statistics. And this is the great contradiction that Ambedkar noted. In some of the Adivasi areas, some Adivasis have taken to non-frequent thought. They have their own militia and armies, and they have resisted. The only reason why they survived is because they took up arms. If they haven't, the question in India now is class struggle or caste struggle. And the reason for that is communists in India say, well, when we have our socialism, the economic disparity will disappear and the caste system will disappear with it. The other side argues, not necessarily. And they point toward things like, the Soviet Union, women become better, but gender equality, inequality did not disappear. And the system in India, you are taught from the very beginning, you are different from others, you are high caste. You cannot mix with those children. So it becomes a belief system which is ingrained, and because you marry in your own caste, so it's self-perpetuating in that sense. I think that's the, okay. Yeah, there is caste discrimination in UK. It should definitely exist. University scholars have done that. The government won't pass a legislation. Yeah, they're digging their heels in, and there's a lot of investment in trade with India at stake. So the untouchables in UK, for them, is a David and Goliath scenario, because they're up against multinational companies, billions to spend. Okay. I was asked a question once: why was caste system useful? You know. I think the question was, did caste system do any good at all to India? And I said yes. It opened up all these areas, you know, where there wasn't that much agricultural production. It opened it up to agricultural production on a bigger scale, and that was a good thing it did. Otherwise, it was a disaster for humanity. So it is for one reason alone, which is there is, you know, an unholy alliance between those people who are practicing the caste system in its most brutal form and the rich industrialists who are finding the tribal, Adivasi tribal and untouchable and low caste labor, which is very, very cheap in India. So how do you keep it cheap? You suppress them socially. Yeah? This is a presentation. So if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.